Before we begin today's episode, a content warning. This episode contains discussions of sexual abuse involving minors, as well as spiritual and institutional abuse. These are difficult but important stories, and while we approach them with care and sensitivity, some listeners may find the content distressing or triggering. If you've experienced abuse, especially in a church setting, please know that you are not alone, and there are people who want to help. You can reach out to the National Sexual Assault Hotline at 1-800-656-HOPE or visit rain.org. That's RAINN.org. In our last episode, we explored the rise of Michael and Brenda Gatlin, the husband and wife team who grew Duluth Vineyard into a national model of success within the Vineyard Movement. They knew how to win the game. They knew which numbers mattered. And they knew how to make sure their influence extended beyond their local church into Vineyard USA itself. But this week, the story takes a darker turn. Because the power Michael and Brenda amassed didn't just protect them, it protected someone much closer, their son. This is Chapter 3, The Protected Son. Jackson Gatlin was the son of Michael and Brenda Gatlin. From a young age, people around him noticed things didn't sit quite right. Patterns that raised concern. But in a church where his parents were spiritual royalty, those concerns rarely got traction.
When I was a youth pastor, I had all three of the Gatlin kids. And the two youngest were, and still to this day, are amazing, great humans. Jackson was always out of control. The first memory I have is we're outside and there's 100 kids, right? There's way too many kids there. And Jackson is throwing something at someone, and I just asked him to stop. And he looked at me and he's like, "Oh, I hate you." I said, "Get inside." It's like he goes inside to cool off. And he's a hothead. He is his dad to a T when it comes to that. He can go from like 0 to insanely angry in a second. And so I walked into the church to like cool him off. And as soon as I came in, he took a glass bottle and he threw it at me. And it, of course, broke. And I'm like, this is not, what would be the right word? This kid can, like other teenagers. So this is not unique just to Jackson. But he can just go on both ends way too quickly. You never know what Jackson you're going to get. Because then he started crying. He's like, "Chris, I'm so sorry. Please let me go outside and hang out with my friends." He's probably, 15. Then another time, my brother, who was one of our leaders, again, did something, and Jackson turned around and choked him. And Dano, that's my brother, said, I knew I couldn't hit him, right? Because he's a minor, but I didn't know what to do. So I just waited until he stopped before he almost blacked out. So then I had to go, of course, talk to my boss and his parents. And I have no idea what they did with that.
Brenda, who served as co-executive pastor alongside her husband, repeatedly pushed for Jackson to be placed in leadership roles within the church. First in youth ministry, and later in HLI, the Heroic Leadership Institute. Despite his lack of qualifications, despite concerns that were already emerging, then the red flags became louder. Chris reported that Jackson had taken teenage girls for rides in his car, alone, without another adult present. This wasn't speculation. This was reported directly to Michael Gatlin. And nothing happened.
We had a policy you couldn't be alone in a car with the opposite sex if they were a minor. And my entire 13 years of doing student ministry there, that was never an issue. But Jackson, one summer, I was driving on 9th Street and he came by and he was in driving these two teenage girls in his car. I talked to him, and he said, dude, you can't do this. It's in our policy. You know this. You understand that this isn't just to protect those girls, obviously. It's also to protect you and in the integrity of our church. And he's like, oh, Chris, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. So then a couple months later, I don't know, 4 or 5 months later, I'm driving by and see him again with 3 girls in his car. And this time I went to Michael and I said, this is not okay. I've already met with Jackson once. He's disregarding what I'm asking him to do. Like, no one else on our team would still be on this team. But Michael, like, what do you want me to do? Which again, power imbalance, narcissistic leader that created, this is how you report up the chain. I wouldn't have done this with anyone else. But because he's Jackson, his kid, I felt like this is what I'm supposed to do. And so Michael said, don't tell Brenda, which, again, another huge red flag. And he said, I'll talk to him. I'll take care of it. And that's all I heard. And Jackson was still on the team. And so I assumed that father-son, because Jackson was living there at the time. And I thought it was all going to be okay.
Eventually, Jackson moved from working with youth to working inside HLI. But even then, his supervisor was, again, his mother, Brenda. Until Duluth's then executive pastor, John Kluwer, helped write a nepotism policy to prevent that exact kind of conflict of interest. But instead of following it, Michael went to the board he himself had selected and quietly asked for an exemption. And it was approved, just like that. If the nepotism policy had been enforced, if checks and balances existed, this story might have turned out differently.
When Jackson was no longer working student ministries, he got hired to be the Heroic Leadership Institute, HLI. And his wife was also working as an admin. And then Jackson's brother was also working at the church. And at the time, I was a part of the senior leadership team. And Michael and Brenda were on it as well. And John Kluwer, who is now the lead pastor at Duluth Vineyard, and he has a law background. He's brilliant. And he said, we should have a nepotism policy in place to ensure that if anything happens, right, we're by our bylaws and our policies, we are covered. And it's just wise. Like, Brenda shouldn't be coaching. That's what we call it, coaching. It was just telling. Brenda was coaching Jackson, and Michael was coaching his kids are everywhere. And as SLT, we talked about it. Brenda cried, and she's like, this is unfair. I'm a pastor, and let me use my gifts, and my kids are gifted, and I can impart wisdom that no one else can give them. She referenced other vineyards. There's another vineyard in Wisconsin that their entire family was the staff. And so she referenced that and saying, look how good that is. And those people are amazing, but like that creates a problematic system. So as an SLT, we outvoted Brenda, and we enacted a nepotism policy. John wrote it up. We all looked at it. We signed off on it, and it goes into it goes into the employee handbook. Well, I didn't know, but a little while after that meeting, Michael went to the Duluth Vineyard board or council and asked for an exemption for Brenda and Michael, that they could still coach their kids, and had a whole reasoning behind of helping HLI explode and grow. And the board approved it, but it didn't tell anyone. And when I met with the team, that the third party that did the investigation, and I told all my stories, the lady stopped and she goes, if the board would have voted that down, we wouldn't be having this conversation, because if Jackson was doing all these allegedly horrible, evil things, he would have had to report to someone else, and they might have caught it. They might have seen it. And if he was only Jackson's only talking about that with his mom as his boss, anything that came up as an allegation, and they did, Brenda dismissed them as, you are demonic, you have mental health issues, this isn't God. And she did it on multiple accounts with HLI students. We wouldn't have this fucking problem if they would have just followed the nepotism policy. But it goes back to the power that not just Michael, but the way the Vineyard and their bylaws are created. The senior pastor has so much incredible unchecked power and at the mercy of hoping that the board is going to do something. But when you get to pick the people on your board, you have power over them.
Allegedly, at some point, two mothers even came forward. They told Brenda that Jackson had sexually abused their daughters. Brenda didn't act. In fact, she allegedly blamed the girls, suggesting they were just looking for attention or had, quote, issues. This is something we've seen over and over again in churches. The weaponization of perceived emotional instability in order to discredit victims. Brenda had risen within Vineyard USA, often called in to help resolve issues in other churches. She knew how to shape narratives. Michael was the national director of church planting, arguably one of the most influential roles in the entire movement. Together, they had built a fortress of influence. And inside that fortress, Jackson was safe. Not the girls, not the staff who raised concerns, and not the parents who tried to sound the alarm, but Jackson. The system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as it was built. No formal oversight of senior pastors. No enforced nepotism policy. No third-party reporting mechanism. No HR department. No abuse training. No neutral place to go. Only other pastors, often close friends of the person being reported. The calls, as they say, were coming from inside the house. Eventually, it wasn't the system that exposed Jackson. It was a former youth group member who reached out to Chris Sauter, former youth pastor at Duluth, after learning that Jackson was still being elevated in ministry. This individual told Chris what had happened to a friend years earlier. Chris then brought that information to John Kluwer, and John did something extraordinary. He went around Michael and Brenda. He informed law enforcement. He brought in members of the church council to form a special investigative committee, because he knew this couldn't stay internal.
When I found out, I had a former student contact me and say, can we go out and get a drink? So we go out and get a drink, and they tell me one of their friends from youth group told them a while ago of what Jackson allegedly did to this student. And he never told anyone because the friend asked him not to tell anyone. And it wasn't until later that Jackson was moving up into a position and was getting more pastoral authority, where he finally felt like, I have to say something. And so that person went to another Duluth Vineyard pastor, and that Duluth Vineyard pastor went over Michael and Brenda and went right to the board. So that's how it all started. When I heard the news, or I heard it that in that meeting, it devastated me. I went into a deep depression. And when victims would contact me, once it became public, I apologized to this one victim, said, I'm so sorry. I'm the one who said it's a safe place. I'm the youth pastor. It's my job to make sure that kids are having fun and it's safe, and that the people on the team are all background checked and trained. And I, of course, I'm a high feeler, so I started crying. And what they told me was, Chris, he was hiding in plain sight. He was doing things to me, saying things to me. And I didn't even know that he was doing this with 11 other girls. So if I couldn't tell, how in the hell were you going to be able to see what was happening? And it was in most victim stories, right? and I am not comparing at all my trauma to theirs. Trauma's trauma, but like, I couldn't even talk about my own spiritual trauma with the Gatlins until I got out of that system. It was like, I felt embarrassed. I felt stupid. I felt like at the time, this is just Satan trying to take down the church. And so you disassociate with your body and your feelings. And that's what a lot of victims said, is they're like, we didn't want to hurt the church. Maybe I asked for it, right? I replied to the text. And so that's why it took so long. And then allegedly there's, 2 moms that said they did confront Brenda, and that Brenda dismissed it, saying that you have a needy daughter and she has mental health issues. She has dad issues. And so if that's 2 stories, how many other stories are out there that Brenda just like protected her kid? Because she told me many times, unrelated to this, but like when it came to school, she would write his papers. She would do his homework, because she's like, Jackson's made for ministry and no one's giving him a chance. And anything that threatened what she believed came from God, right? She would handle it. And she was so good at handling situations, sometimes in a very positive way, right? But clearly she had a different agenda. She had a different intent that she didn't communicate with anyone else.
From the beginning, the Duluth Special Committee took the allegations seriously. But Vineyard USA had a very different response. Duluth wanted to hire Grace, a third-party abuse investigation firm. Longtime Vineyard pastor of Vineyard Columbus, Rich Nathan, on behalf of Vineyard USA, called John Kluwer and tried to talk him out of it. Duluth wanted Michael and Brenda removed from all involvement. Rob Morgan, speaking for Vineyard USA, actually suggested Michael help guide the church instead. Duluth said no severance. Vineyard USA paid them both severance, quietly, with no transparency about where the money came from. Donations, local tithes, the Lilly Grant. Duluth wanted transparency, public timelines, full communication logs. Vineyard USA objected strongly. The conflict was clear. One side wanted truth, the other wanted control. Eventually, Jackson Gatlin was arrested. The allegations were serious and disturbing. Duluth Vineyard insisted that all 3, Jackson, Michael, and Brenda, participate in the Grace investigation. Michael and Brenda were suspended, and eventually they resigned or were terminated from their roles. The results of the Grace investigation were damning. It found serious leadership failures and a pattern of silencing and minimizing abuse allegations. The court case against Jackson concluded with a conviction, but the scars remain. And even after everything was made public, after the Grace report, after Jackson's arrest, Vineyard USA refused to discipline Michael and Brenda. Duluth recommended they be disqualified from ministry. Vineyard USA declined. And for a time, Michael and Brenda were reportedly attending Jay Pathak's own church, until members there spoke up. There are now civil cases pending. Victims and families are suing Jackson, Michael and Brenda Gatlin, Duluth Vineyard, and Vineyard USA. They're being represented by attorneys specializing in institutional abuse.
So obviously my name is Spencer Kuban. I'm a board-certified civil trial attorney. My home base is here in Palm Beach, Florida, but I litigate cases nationwide, and I have been specializing in sexual trauma, sexual abuse, and sex trafficking type cases for probably going on about 20 years now. I've handled all different types of cases involving abuse, and those cases range from things like inappropriate utilization of private videotapes, secret videotaping of private incidents with 2 people where one is non-consenting, abuse like rape, abuse like physical abuse, and these can be individuals or institutions that I go against across the country. Cases that are representative of some of the work I've done involve the Jeffrey Epstein cases, where I represented 9 of those victims, and I represented victim number 1 back in 2008. She was the first victim to actually go to the police and report Mr. Epstein's conduct on Palm Beach Island, and it actually started that initial investigation back in the late 2000s. That then, obviously, as we all know now, kind of steamrolled into what it eventually became. But I've also represented other individual victims. For example, I represent Farrah Abraham, who is a teen mom. She was one of the originals on the MTV show, who was attacked here in Palm Beach by a man who has been accused of many different rapes out in California. And he was a former mayor, actually, in Northern California that had to step down from his position as a result of some of the allegations that were brought against him. I've also represented victims of Bill Cosby. Back when those incidents came out, I helped a bunch of those victims, one in particular, through the process, both the criminal and the civil process, in trying to help walk them through what is otherwise a very difficult proceeding to people that really don't understand the system, either criminal or civil. Now, I believe that we have evidence of an institutional failure that is far beyond just a greater weight of the evidence, but is frankly at the level of proof beyond a reasonable doubt that there was knowledge, that the institution knew what was going on and failed to prevent further abuse throughout time, which caused many additional victims to be abused by this perpetrator. Now, we are at the early stages of our case. The complaints have all been filed. They have all been responded to with general denials by the institutions as well as the individuals. And we are now in what we call the discovery phase of the case. And that phase will last for probably a year or so.
And these cases don't just challenge individual actions. They call into question the very structure of the vineyard itself. Because the failure wasn't just moral, it was systemic. Lack of oversight, no protection for whistleblowers, nepotism, no clear reporting pathways, and a culture that rewarded results over accountability. This wasn't just about one church or one family. It was about a system that allowed this to happen, ignored the warning signs, and prioritized reputation over righteousness. But Duluth wasn't the only church where something was going wrong. Next week, we moved to the West Coast, to Anaheim, California, to a pastor couple who were, in many ways, the Gatlin spiritual siblings, Alan and Catherine Scott. They were bold, charismatic, visionary, and there were warning signs with them too. Join me next time as we examine the rise of the Scotts and how their story parallels everything we've just heard. Spoiled Fruit, Faith and Power is written and produced by me, John Williamson. Special thanks to those who contributed interviews and expertise for this episode. You can support the show by rating, reviewing, and sharing it with the people who need to hear it. If you've experienced abuse in a church context, please know you're not alone. There are people and organizations that can help. Support is available at rainn.org, RAINN.org, or by calling 1-800-656-HOPE. Thanks for listening.
With so many options, why choose Arizona State University?
For me, the only online option was ASU because of the quality. Their faculty was really involved with their students and care about your personal journey. The dedication to my personal development from my professors, that's been extremely valuable to me.
Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online. That's a degree better. Explore more than 300 undergraduate, graduate, and certificate programs at asuonline.asu.edu.